You've entered the archives of the forgotten. I'm Dr. Haunted. Tonight I'll show you what was never meant to be seen. Just remember, once you know the truth, you can't unsee it. House sitting was my side hustle through college. Wealthy families paid well for someone responsible to watch their homes while they traveled, and I'd built a reputation for being trustworthy and thorough. The Henderson estate was my biggest job yet, a sprawling Victorian mansion in the hills, complete with security system, multiple fireplaces, and enough rooms to house a small army. The family would be in Europe for 3 weeks, leaving me alone with their 2 cats and detailed care instructions. Mrs. Henderson walked me through the house on my first day, pointing out quirks and routines. The grandfather clock in the foyer chimes every hour, she explained. The cats like to be fed at 6 a.m. sharp. And don't worry about the footsteps upstairs. Old houses settle, especially at night. Footsteps. She'd mentioned it so casually, like commenting on creaky floorboards or drafty windows. I should have asked for clarification, but she was already rushing to catch her flight. The first week passed peacefully. The cats were friendly, the house was comfortable, and I enjoyed having space to study without roommate distractions. The grandfather clock's hourly chimes became a comforting rhythm, marking time in the otherwise silent mansion. Then I heard the footsteps. They started on the second night of the second week. Measured, deliberate steps pacing back and forth in the master bedroom directly above the living room. The sound was unmistakable. Someone walking from the window to the dresser and back again, over and over. I checked the entire upstairs. Every room was empty, every window locked, every closet clear. But when I returned downstairs, the pacing resumed. The pattern was always identical. 15 steps from window to dresser, pause, 15 steps back. The timing never varied, exactly 30 seconds between direction changes, continuing for precisely 1 hour before stopping. I convinced myself it was the settling Mrs. Henderson had mentioned. Old wood expanding and contracting, pipes adjusting to temperature changes, the normal sounds of an aging house. But settling doesn't follow such precise patterns. On night 10, I decided to investigate more thoroughly. I set up my laptop to record audio in the living room, then positioned myself in the master bedroom above. The pacing began at exactly 11 p.m., as it had every night. But I was standing in the empty bedroom, watching the floorboards where the footsteps should be. The sound was clearly coming from this room, but nothing was causing it. The wooden floor didn't creak or bend under invisible weight. The sound seemed to originate from the air itself. I checked my recording the next morning. Clear as day, measured footsteps, exactly 30 seconds apart for exactly 1 hour. But layered underneath was something else. A faint voice, barely audible, repeating the same phrase. Where did I put them? Where did I put them? I researched the house's history and found the tragedy. Eleanor Henderson, the current owner's grandmother, had lived in the mansion until her death in 1987. She'd suffered from dementia in her final years, becoming obsessed with finding her missing jewelry collection. According to family stories, Eleanor spent her last months pacing her bedroom every night, searching frantically for gems she'd hidden and forgotten. She died of exhaustion after a particularly intense episode, found collapsed by her bedroom window after walking for hours. The jewelry was never found. I called Mrs. Henderson in Paris, carefully asking about her grandmother. "Oh, you met Eleanor," she said with surprising calm. "She's harmless, dear, just looking for her treasures. We've learned to live with her. Live with her. She's been pacing that room for 35 years. Same time every night, same pattern. We had the house blessed once, but she came right back. I think she's protecting the jewelry, making sure no one else finds it before she does." Mrs. Henderson's casual acceptance made me realize this wasn't a ghost story to the family. It was simply part of living in their ancestral home. Eleanor wasn't haunting the house. She was maintaining it, continuing her eternal search while keeping watch over her domain. I finished the house-sitting job without incident. Eleanor's nightly walks became comforting background noise like a security guard making rounds. Some evenings I'd sit in the living room and listen to her determined footsteps, admiring her persistence. The Hendersons paid me a bonus and asked me to house-sit again next year. "Eleanor likes you," Mrs. Henderson explained. "She's usually suspicious of strangers, but she let you stay. That's quite an honor." I accepted immediately. Working alongside a ghost was unusual, but Eleanor was the most dedicated employee I'd ever encountered. Some people retire when they die. Others just change shifts, from day security to night watch, from living guardian to eternal protector. Eleanor Henderson is still searching for her jewelry, still pacing her bedroom, still keeping watch over the family home she refused to leave. The treasures remain hidden, but perhaps that's the point. As long as they're missing, she has a reason to stay. Babysitting the Morrison twins was supposed to be easy money. 7-year-old Emma and Ethan were well-behaved kids who went to bed on time and rarely caused trouble. Their parents, both doctors, worked late shifts and needed reliable overnight care twice a week. The Morrison house was modern and comfortable, equipped with every safety feature imaginable. Security cameras, motion sensors, automatic locks, and a detailed emergency protocol taped to the refrigerator. Mrs. Morrison walked me through the routine on my first night. Bedtime is 8 p.m. sharp. They can watch one movie before bed, but nothing scary. If you hear them talking to someone after lights out, don't worry. They have very active imaginations. Talking to someone? I filed that away with the other quirks of childhood behavior I'd learned to expect. The twins were angels that first evening. We played board games, watched a Disney movie, and they went to bed without complaint. I settled in the living room with my textbooks, enjoying the quiet house. At 9:30 p.m. I heard voices from upstairs, Emma and Ethan having an animated conversation with someone. Their words were muffled through the closed door, but they sounded happy and engaged. I crept upstairs to investigate. Standing outside their bedroom, I could hear 3 distinct voices. Emma's high-pitched giggle, Ethan's excited chatter, and a third voice, older, patient, clearly female. I knocked softly and entered. Both twins were sitting up in bed, looking toward the corner of the room where shadows gathered near their toy chest. "Who are you talking to?" I asked gently. "Miss Sarah," Emma said matter-of-factly. "She used to live here before us. She tells us stories about when she was little." Ethan nodded enthusiastically. "She knows all the best hiding spots in the house, and she makes sure we're safe when Mommy and Daddy work late." I looked towards the corner they were facing. Nothing there but darkness and the vague outline of stuffed animals. "What does Miss Sarah look like?" I asked. "She's pretty," Emma said. "She has long dark hair and wears old-fashioned dresses. She says she took care of children in this house for a very long time." I tucked them back into bed, chalking it up to typical childhood imagination. But as I turned off their light, I could have sworn I heard a woman's voice whisper, "Sleep well, little ones." The next morning, I asked Mrs. Morrison about the house's history. Her expression grew serious. "We bought this house from the estate of Sarah Williams," she said quietly. "Sarah was a live-in nanny here for 40 years, caring for several families' children. She died peacefully in her sleep in the room that's now our guest bedroom." My blood chilled. Did the twins know about Sarah before they started talking to her? No, we never mentioned her, but children are sensitive to these things. Mrs. Morrison paused. "Sarah isn't harmful. The previous families all reported similar experiences, children talking to an invisible caregiver, being comforted during nightmares, staying safe during storms. We consider her a blessing." Over the following weeks, I observed Sarah's presence more carefully. The twins would giggle at seemingly empty air, play hide-and-seek with an invisible partner, and sit quietly listening to stories only they could hear. During a thunderstorm one evening, Emma had a nightmare. I found her sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face, but she wasn't alone. The air beside her seemed warmer, denser, as if someone was sitting there providing comfort. Miss Sarah says storms are just the sky crying happy tears, Emma told me, already calming down. She says we're safe inside and the rain helps flowers grow. I began leaving small offerings for Sarah, a cup of tea that would be empty by morning, children's books left open to different pages, toys arranged in patterns the twins claimed Sarah enjoyed. Nothing dramatic or frightening, just acknowledgement of her continued presence. One evening I heard footsteps in the hallway during my study time. Soft, careful steps moving between the twins' room and the guest bedroom where Sarah had died. I followed the sounds, finding doors slightly ajar that I'd left closed. Night lights turned on in darkened rooms. Sarah was making her rounds, checking on her charges just as she had for 4 decades of living service. The twins grew more confident and secure with each passing week. Their parents noticed the improvements, fewer nightmares, easier bedtimes, more imaginative play. Sarah's invisible presence was nurturing them in ways that living caregivers couldn't match. I worked for the Morrisons for 2 years, becoming part of a unique household where the living and dead collaborated in childcare. Sarah never appeared to me directly, but I felt her approval in small gestures. Toys mysteriously returned to proper places. Nightmares that ended too quickly. Children who felt loved even when their parents worked long hours. When the twins outgrew the need for overnight babysitters, Mrs. Morrison shared one final detail. Sarah appeared to children until they turned 8 years old. After that, she'd move on to families with younger children who needed her more. True to pattern, Sarah's visits grew less frequent as Emma and Ethan approached their 8th birthday. But her influence remained in their confidence, creativity, and sense of security that came from knowing they'd been loved by someone whose dedication transcended death itself. Sarah Williams spent 40 years caring for children in life, and continues that mission in death. Some nannies retire when their charges grow up. Others find new families to nurture, expanding their definition of home to include anyone who needs protection. The Morrison house still shelters families with young children, and Sarah still makes her rounds. Death couldn't end her calling, it just expanded her availability to work the night shift forever. Inheriting my grandmother's house should have been a blessing. The mortgage was paid off, the neighborhood was safe, and I had wonderful childhood memories of visiting her cozy cottage on Maple Street. But Grandma Rose had lived alone for 30 years after Grandpa died, developing routines so rigid they'd become sacred rituals. Every light switch had to be checked 3 times before bed. Every door required 2 locks and a security chain. The tea kettle went on at exactly 4 p.m. for afternoon tea, whether anyone was home or not. Moving in meant inheriting not just her furniture and photographs, but the weight of decades-old habits that had kept loneliness at bay. The first week felt normal. I was busy unpacking, painting rooms, and making the space my own, but gradually I noticed things that didn't make sense. Lights I'd turned off would be on when I returned from work. The tea kettle would be steaming on the stove at 4 p.m. even though I'd left it empty that morning. Doors I'd left unlocked would have both deadbolts engaged and chains secured. I assumed stress was affecting my memory. Moving is traumatic, and I was grieving Grandma Rose while adapting to home ownership. Of course, I'd forget small tasks and routines, but the patterns were too consistent to be random forgetfulness. Every day at 4 p.m, the tea kettle whistled. Every evening, the same lights would be on. Kitchen, hallway, front porch, exactly as they'd been during Grandma's nightly security routine. I set up a camera to monitor the kitchen while I was at work. The footage showed something impossible. The tea kettle lifting itself from the counter to the stove, the gas burner igniting without human intervention, water pouring from the faucet into the kettle through empty air. But the movements weren't chaotic or supernatural looking. They were careful, practiced, efficient, the movements of someone who'd performed the same actions thousands of times before. I recognized those movements. I'd watched Grandma Rose make tea every afternoon during my childhood visits, her arthritic hands moving with muscle memory that transcended physical limitations. She was still there, still maintaining her routines, still taking care of the house she'd called home for 5 decades. I began participating in her schedule instead of fighting it. At 3:55 p.m, I'd set out 2 cups and her favorite chamomile tea bags. The kettle would begin heating exactly on time, and I'd pour tea for both of us. 1 cup for me, 1 for the empty chair where she used to sit. The house felt warmer when I honored her routines. Doors stayed properly locked, lights followed their logical patterns, and I began to understand the comfort she'd found in consistent daily rituals. Sometimes I'd talk to her while we shared afternoon tea. I'd tell her about my day, ask advice about home repairs, or share memories from my childhood visits. The house would respond with small signs, a photograph straightening itself on the wall, a curtain rustling without wind, the faint scent of her lavender perfume. One evening, I found a handwritten note on the kitchen counter in Grandma's distinctive script. "Thank you for keeping the routines alive. They give structure to eternity." I kept that note and began finding others. Reminders to check the furnace filter, suggestions for which plants would thrive in the garden, gentle corrections when I'd forgotten steps in her security routine. Grandma Rose wasn't haunting the house. She was collaborating in its maintenance. Her routines had been survival mechanisms during decades of widowhood, ways of creating purpose and structure when living alone. Death hadn't eliminated her need for routine. It had made those patterns eternal. I lived in the house for 3 years, gradually learning all of Grandma's methods and the reasoning behind them. The afternoon tea ritual became sacred time for us to connect across the boundary between life and death. Her security routine gave me confidence living alone in a new neighborhood. When I finally moved to a larger house after getting married, I worried about leaving Grandma behind. But the new owners were an elderly couple who appreciated the house's quirks and established rhythms. Mrs. Patterson called me 6 months later. "Your grandmother is wonderful," she said warmly. "She makes the best afternoon tea and we feel so safe with her security checks every evening. It's like having a guardian angel who's also an excellent housekeeper." I smiled, knowing Grandma Rose had found new people to care for, a new family to guide through the routines that had sustained her through decades of solitary living. Some people find meaning in grand gestures or dramatic changes. Others find purpose in small daily rituals that create order from chaos. Grandma Rose discovered that consistency could transcend mortality, that habits strong enough could become eternal, providing structure and comfort to anyone willing to honor them. The cottage on Maple Street still runs on Rose's schedule. New residents learn her rhythms, participate in her routines, and benefit from wisdom accumulated over 93 years of life and decades of dedicated afterlife service. Death ended Rose's physical presence but strengthened her commitment to home maintenance. Some spirits move on to whatever comes next. Others stay exactly where their habits are needed most, turning routine into a form of immortal love. The home security system came with the apartment, a sophisticated setup with motion sensors, door alarms, and cameras covering every entrance. My landlord, Mr. Chen, insisted on demonstrating every feature before I signed the lease. "Very important you use system," he said in broken English, his hands shaking as he programmed my access code. "This building has history. System keeps everyone safe. Never turn off. Never ignore alarms." The monthly monitoring fee was steep for my budget, but Mr. Chen refused to rent to anyone who wouldn't maintain the security service. His desperation to find a tenant who'd respect the system should have been a red flag. For the first month, everything worked perfectly. I'd arm the system when leaving, disarm it when returning, and sleep soundly knowing every entry point was monitored. The monthly reports showed no unusual activity, just my daily routines captured in digital detail. Then the false alarm started. Motion detected in the living room at 2:17 a.m. I'd check the footage, see nothing but empty space, and reset the system. Door sensor triggered on the front entrance while I was home watching TV. The camera showed a closed, locked door with no one nearby. I called the monitoring company repeatedly. They ran diagnostics, replaced sensors, and updated software. But the phantom alarms continued, always between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., always in different locations, always showing empty rooms on camera. Maybe you have mice, the technician suggested. Small animals can trigger motion sensors. But I'd lived in apartments with mice before. They don't set off door sensors or create human-sized heat signatures that vanish when cameras focus on them. The breakthrough came when I started watching the live feeds instead of just reviewing recorded footage. At 2:23 a.m. on a Tuesday, I saw something that chilled me to the bone. A figure moved through my living room, translucent but clearly human-shaped, walking with purpose from the kitchen to the hallway. The motion sensor tracked its progress perfectly, red lights blinking as it passed each detection zone. But when I ran to the living room, nothing was there, just empty space and the lingering sensation that I wasn't alone. I researched the building's history and found the tragedy that explained everything. In 2019, the previous tenant, Marcus Webb, had been murdered during a home invasion. He died protecting his elderly mother, who'd been visiting for the holidays. Marcus had been a security consultant who'd installed the building's original system himself. He was obsessive about home protection, having survived a break-in as a child that left him with lasting trauma about safety and vulnerability. The night he died, Marcus had been monitoring his security cameras when 3 intruders bypassed his front door sensors. He'd fought them off long enough for his mother to escape through a back window, but died from injuries sustained in the struggle. The security footage from that night had been crucial evidence in catching his killers. Marcus's own system had provided the proof needed to convict the men who'd murdered him. I realized Marcus hadn't left the apartment. He'd become part of the security system he'd designed. His obsession with protection had evolved into eternal vigilance, monitoring threats that only he could perceive. The next time alarms triggered at 2 a.m., I didn't investigate or reset them. Instead, I sat in my bedroom and said, "Marcus, I know you're there. Thank you for keeping watch." The alarms stopped immediately. From that night forward, I treated Marcus as a collaborative security partner rather than a malfunction. When sensors detected his presence, I'd acknowledge his rounds and thank him for his vigilance. The false alarms became regular check-ins, proof that my building's guardian was on duty. I began leaving small offerings, a cup of coffee by the security panel, technical magazines about home protection systems, thank you notes acknowledging his dedication. Marcus's activity became more purposeful, less random. One night, persistent alarms woke me at 3 a.m. Instead of dismissing them, I checked the live feeds and saw Marcus moving frantically between the front door and my bedroom, his translucent form more agitated than usual. That's when I heard voices in the hallway, multiple people discussing which apartments looked easiest to break into. Marcus had detected an actual threat and was trying to warn me. I called the police, who arrived to find 3 men with burglary tools casing the building. Marcus's early warning system had prevented another tragedy, protecting residents just as he'd tried to protect his mother years earlier. The building owner installed a memorial plaque in the lobby. Marcus Webb, forever on duty. Other tenants began reporting their own experiences with the phantom security guard. Alarms that prevented accidents, warnings that saved lives, a protective presence that made everyone feel safer. I lived in that apartment for 2 years, working alongside Marcus in an unusual partnership between the living and the dead. He handled overnight security while I managed daytime maintenance of his beloved system. When I moved out, I made sure the new tenant understood the building's unique security features. The system has a very dedicated monitoring service, I explained. Never ignore the alarms and always say thank you when they keep you safe. Marcus Webb died protecting his family, but found a way to extend that protection to everyone who'd live in his building. Some security guards clock out when their shift ends. Others expand their definition of duty to include eternal service, ensuring no one else suffers the fate that claimed them. The building on Elm Street has the most responsive security system in the city, monitored by someone whose dedication transcends the boundary between life and death. Marcus is still on duty, still watching for threats, still protecting residents with the same obsessive care that defined his living years. Death ended Marcus's physical presence but strengthened his commitment to security. True guardians never retire. They just switch from protecting specific people to protecting everyone who needs their vigilance. That concludes tonight's case. But the shadows don't sleep. I'm Dr. Haunted. Until next time, keep your doors locked, your lights low, and your nightmares closer.